Hi, this is my review of Slaves to Fate, an adventure for the Demon Gate role-playing game. If you haven't seen my review of the core rulebook for Demon Gate, I recommend that you check out the links that I will put in the description below. It will also take you to the expansion, the Tortured South. Now let's get started. Slaves to Fate is a standalone adventure, but it can also serve as the beginning of a campaign based on an ancient and very ominous prophecy. There is this event known as the Forever Winter, and the player characters will be in the middle, in the very vortex of this eschatological event. This review is going to contain spoilers. However, when it comes to the short fiction that is contained here, I will avoid spoiling that, so you as a game master will still find some surprises when you read that piece of fiction. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is actually great. My only nitpick is that in this description of the back of the book, I feel like the paragraph is a bit too close to the borders of this circular frame. So I think it's a bit too tight. There should be a bit more space like in the other Demon Gate books. But that's my only nitpick when it comes to the quality. Everything is excellent. The document is fully bookmarked. Everything is clear and well explained. Everything is well organized. You have appropriate looking illustrations for the entire thing, for the adventure itself, and other elements within this book. So the quality is really good. And the table of contents is hyperlinked, so it's going to be very easy for you to navigate the entire thing. Now let's talk about the contents. First, we have a small piece of fiction introducing you to the Fey Realm within Demon Gate, or the types of beings that are related to the Fey Realm. The entire theme and mood of the adventure reminds me of those dark folk tales or fairy tales in Irish literature, or folklore rather, that portray fairy and goblin-like entities in a more disturbing tone. So this piece of fiction shows how a normal everyday life occurrence takes a very dark, very sinister twist by the end. Following that, we have an introduction to the adventure itself. This adventure, like I mentioned at the beginning, could be played as a stand-alone experience, but this is the start, the prelude to the Forever Winter, a sort of fantasy apocalypse that is going to be unleashed upon the world of Koth. This could be a major theme of your campaign, or it could be just like a background element that is just there. It's going to affect the weather and the types of creatures, of course, that the characters could find throughout the entire campaign, but it's very easy for you to take other adventures and insert them into this sort of storyline. Even after the Forever Winter has been activated or triggered, you can still use any adventures that you have created yourself or that you have purchased, and the campaign would not lose its coherency. But it's still quite exciting to see what other adventures and modules are going to be brought forth to support this Forever Winter event. This book also introduces doppelgangers. These are handled somewhat like changelings in other role-playing games. And by the end of this book, I will talk about this because they are a new species that you can use in your Demon Gate games. That's a great incentive to get this adventure module. It includes all of the details, all of the background information and mechanical information to play as a doppelganger. Suffice to say for this introduction that they are beings of the Fey realms, but they were born into this more mundane or tangible side. They have a few memories, some vague recollections of their existence, their ties to the Fey realm, but otherwise they are more accustomed to living on this side of Koth. To play this adventure, you only need the Demon Gate role-playing game book, but if you own the Tortured South expansion, it would add more details, flesh out some things related to the story, some geographical elements, but it's not a must-have. I think that using the Demon Gate core rulebook by itself would be enough, but it's still a nice thing if you have the Tortured South expansion. Now let's talk about the prelude to this adventure. There was this expedition that left for the forests of Everdark. It's an expedition composed of slavers. Now, the strange thing is that nobody knows exactly how these slavers got the rights to work on these forests, because this zone is quite dangerous. There are undead, beastmen, strange beings from the Fey realms. But the thing that is actually making this possible is that there is a cult trying to bring about the Forever Winter prophecy, to make it a reality. So this cult has actually been supporting and guiding these slaver lumberjacks, and they have placed an agent within the slavers, rather within the slaves. This betrayer could be played as a non-player character or a player character. In fact, I would recommend that a player participates as the betrayer, because this betrayer is actually being controlled by an amulet in his possession. This cursed and corrupt amulet actually extends its influence towards the player characters, the other members of the party, which are also slaves. So the betrayer is being fully controlled by this amulet, so I think that the player is going to have a lot of fun backstabbing his comrades when they least expect it. But when the adventure is over, the hold of the amulet over the betrayer is going to fall apart, and so the player will be able to participate in the campaign as a normal player character. So he will have fun being a betrayer during this initial module and play the rest of the campaign as any other type of adventure. You have a new mechanic to represent this corrupting influence of the amulet. This corruption will accumulate as the player characters fail at different willpower checks throughout the entire adventure. This sort of mechanic will make the characters feel quite paranoid and nervous, because they are making this check and they do not know what this check is all about. The game master must keep the details of this corruption check a secret, and when they accumulate enough points that are equal to their willpower score, they will have a more difficult time taking any action against anything that the betrayer wants to do. So anything that the betrayer is suggesting, any sort of test or action that the betrayer is influencing the characters to carry out, they will probably have an easier time following the betrayer's advice. But when they act against the betrayer, they're going to get a penalty to their rolls. This is a very dangerous adventure module. It's for characters between levels 1 to 3, but expect character death. There are many instances in which the characters can feel perhaps cornered by their attempts at trying to escape from the slavers or trying to fight against the different threats, and there will be no mercy for those that fail. It is recommended that the betrayer is played as the new species introduced in this book, because he basically assumes the form of an orc slave. He is actually a member of the cult, one of the most devious and fanatic members, but by the end of this adventure, he could have a change of heart despite that, or he could modify things however you like when it comes to the background of this character. Maybe he was being controlled all along. So like I said, it's quite possible for a player to play as the betrayer and still keep on participating for the rest of the campaign, helping his other members of the party. So to sum things up, all of the player characters are slaves, and the betrayer amongst them is actually an agent of the cult of the Forever Winter prophecy, disguised as an orc slave. The betrayer has actually bribed the guards so that the characters are not bound in chains, rather they are tied in rope. This is intentional because the betrayer wants to lead the player characters towards the place where he can use the amulet to activate the Forever Winter apocalypse. You have all the details concerning the type of events that will happen in the slaver camp. For example, you could talk to one of the guards, succeed at a charisma attribute check to obtain some rumors. One of the guards could tell one of the slaves that the encampment is in the deepest part of the woods, or he could also inform the slaves of some of the hunting happenings that have been occurring throughout the woods. The player characters need to escape because the slavers are quite harsh. There is a real threat of dying from starvation, perhaps from exposure to the cold, because even though the Forever Winter has not happened yet, the conditions to be camping out in the woods are not very favorable. So you have all the details on how the characters could carry out their escape. Maybe they could remove the wooden pole to which they are tied, but this would be quite an obvious action, and they would have to prepare for a dangerous and hasty escape. But they could also be more stealthy about it. They could go into their tents because their rope that keeps them bound to the pole is long enough to allow them to go into tents at night, and they could try to chew or break through the rope. Characters that are a bit more monstrous, that have sharper teeth perhaps, will have an easier time doing this. But if they are caught trying to escape in any way, they will be severely punished, and further escape attempts will be quite impossible. Something that I think would have been better for this adventure is that if they gave more details about how this doppelganger agent managed to bribe one of the slavers into giving them ropes instead of chains as restraints. Maybe he promised that he would guide the slavers to some treasure, or maybe the agent had already hidden something before entering the slaver camp as an orc slave, and he told the guards that where they could find that treasure and how they could find even more if they kept him and the other slaves tied in that rope. He would guide them to other valuables later on. The reason as to why he wants to be bound in this rope instead of chains is because when it comes to iron, doppelgangers are not very good being in constant contact with this material. It disrupts their abilities. And the doppelganger agent also wants the other slaves to have a better chance at escaping so that he can guide them to the place of the ritual to trigger the forever winter. So you have all of the details on how the characters could make their escape, and plenty more if they think outside of the box, come up with some original suggestions as to how they could escape the slaver's grasp. In this section of the adventure module, you also have information on what happens during a typical workday. There is a real danger, not only of starvation, malnourishment, and getting on the wrong side of the guards, of getting them angry at you, but there is also the corruption effect caused by the amulet. If the player characters fail to escape, or do not attempt to escape because they fear getting caught or anything else, the beastmen will attack the slaver's camp, and this is the best chance of the characters to escape. They will have to, in fact, or they will die. The beastmen are too powerful. They are too many, too savage. They will decimate, completely annihilate any resistance in the slaver's camp. The guards won't be able to do anything against them. So it is up to the player characters to make their escape, perhaps secure some weapons as they are fleeing, and they will have to fight some beastmen as well. They will stand a decent chance at getting out of there alive, unless they run into the horned goat. This is the most powerful beastman. They have no chance against him, at least at this moment, so they will have to make their escape. They will have to cross the bridge and seek refuge from the cold in the forest. As they go deeper into the forest of this forbidden zone, they will see how certain areas of the forest are denied to them. It's like the forest itself is trying to prevent the player characters from reaching the place of the ritual, so that the forever winter apocalypse can happen. They will encounter some very unusual wooden statues that are a part of the puzzle to get out of the forest into the ritual area. These statues have some very disturbing gestures, and the player characters will have to do some slightly disturbing things to open up the path. If they do not hurry up and solve this puzzle, they will be attacked by zombies. And even if they manage to defeat the zombies, and they keep on pushing onwards, they could end up cursed by the Dryad, which is the protector of the forest. She is not currently near the player characters, but her curse remains to affect any who trespass. During the last section of the trek, the characters will run into a group of redcaps. They will be shadowing the player characters, trying to keep themselves hidden. These redcaps can be negotiated with in a certain way, but for the most part, there's probably going to be battle, especially because the betrayer is going to create conflict between the redcaps and the group of recently escaped slaves. Even if the redcaps manage to defeat the player characters, they will still fulfill the prophecy of the forever winter. Even if the player characters somehow reach a sort of agreement with the redcaps, these beings will try to kill the betrayer so that they can take the cursed amulet, but one of the redcaps will be taken over by the will of the amulet, the Forever Winter apocalypse is inevitable. And during the last section of the trek, the player characters and the Betrayer will be attacked by a pack of wolves. It's as if the very forces of nature are acting against the player characters, trying to stop them from triggering the Forever Winter apocalypse. This is where the corruption mechanic takes effect at its strongest. Maybe one or more of the player characters is already suspicious that one among them is actually a Betrayer, the one who is trying to cause this apocalypse. Even if they act against this Betrayer, they will have some penalties because of the corruption effect. And even if the Betrayer is killed, one of the other characters will be controlled by the will of the amulet. So this apocalypse will happen no matter what the characters do. It has been fatally foretold, so to speak. And it is after the Forever Winter has been activated that the Dryad finally arrives. She was held back by the forces that wish to bring about the Forever Winter apocalypse. So now it is too late. She arrives when the amulet has been placed on the altar. But now the Betrayer is completely free from the amulet's control. Now he can fully function as a proper member of the adventuring party. So the Dryad will tell the player characters more about the Forever Winter apocalypse, what is going on, what could lie ahead, and I think this is a good chance to make the Dryad a sort of patron or ally for the player characters. Now, by the end of this adventure module, that is of the book, you have stats on new enemies, the Doppelganger, the Satyr, the Spriggan, but also you have information, complete background and statistical information to play as a Doppelganger character. You have a subspecies which is the Horror Mimic. Both have attribute modifications to their charisma and perception. They are not very charismatic. There is something otherworldly and disturbing to them, so their interactions with other characters could be hindered. However, they are quite perceptive. The Doppelganger normal species is somewhat fragile, and the subspecies, the Horror Mimic, is a bit more sturdy. They both share the Shapeshifter special ability. They can take the form of any humanoid that they have seen, and their true form is a bit more stealthy, so there's an advantage to switching back to your original form. The Horror Mimic has a special attack known as the Horrific Gaze. This is a mental attack that deals quite a bit of damage, proportional to the impersonation skill of the Doppelganger. And iron is quite harmful for both subspecies. When contacting iron, they revert to their natural forms. At first glance, the Horror Mimic looks to be a bit more powerful than the normal Doppelganger character, but the Doppelganger main species has a couple of advantages. It's more stealthy, and it's also slightly more charismatic, so there's that to consider. You have all of the background information on how these beings came to be. There are details on how they were born to the Fae, but they are more at home, outside of the Fae realms. All of the information, the stats, the background details, and even the character name generator for Doppelgangers is quite well presented, quite substantial considering it's just one page. However, I would have liked it if they added more details concerning the physical appearance of the Doppelganger, but thankfully we have an illustration near the back of the book showing how they look like in their original form. So what do I think of Slaves to Fate? This is one of the best adventures that I have seen that handles the player characters as slaves or as prisoners right from the very beginning. Many adventure writers fail at actually presenting a good scenario with the characters as slaves or as prisoners as its starting theme. Some scenarios actually have player characters starting off in a railroad type of situation, and they can do nothing about it. They get captured automatically almost, and this is terrible. It removes the agency, the free will of the players on how they can affect the world through their player characters, and it's quite frustrating. But here the player characters start out as slaves, so this is accepted as part of the background for the player characters. It's not so much something imposed on them, but rather the first challenge that also builds character and further background for each player character. I also like it that in this adventure there are several ways through which the player characters can make their escape. Maybe they want to fight it out while they escape by removing the pole or taking advantage of the Beastmen attack, or maybe they want to be a bit more subtle, trying to cut through their bindings. But there's plenty of information for the player characters to attempt something entirely original perhaps, that will grant them freedom. I also like it how they need to escape through the wilderness, how their situation is quite desperate. You have beastmen, slavers, beings of the Fae. It's like everyone is against the player characters, and it fits the theme of Demon Gate perfectly. It's as if the player characters have crossed some rickety bridge and suddenly this bridge collapses or is burned, and now there is no going back. They are pushed by fatalistic unseen hands into fulfilling this prophecy of the forever winter, of this wintry apocalypse. I also like it how all of the encounters are quite deadly. It is quite possible to end up with a total party kill if you are not careful, but there are still many ways to overcome the challenges. And considering how the adventure reaches a climax, and how they meet this mysterious dryad, it's the perfect ominous platform to start out an entire campaign. Perhaps featuring the Forever Winter as the main theme, or perhaps taking on other adventures and just having the Forever Winter apocalypse on the background, just threatening the player characters with harsher and harsher climate and more disturbing events. And because of the addition of new enemies and the new character species, the Doppelganger, I would consider this adventure module a must-have. Yes, some would consider it optional, but because there is so much content here, and because it serves as such a great way to start an entire campaign, I would consider this one a must-have actually. Even if your current group of player characters does not solve the Forever Winter crisis, maybe in another campaign, another group of adventurers could take on this Forever Winter threat. So the Forever Winter could actually serve as a backdrop for many other campaigns. But still, I'm quite curious as to how they are going to keep on supporting this Forever Winter apocalypse with further adventure modules. And lastly, I would recommend that the game master and the player that is going to be participating as the betrayer get together in secret before running the adventure, so that they can plan ahead as to how the betrayer is going to lure the rest of the group into this altar to trigger the Forever Winter. Maybe they could come up with some signals, some sort of gestures, so that the game master can clue the betrayer as to when he or she needs to start a conflict, for example with the Red Caps, or inform the betrayer if the players need to be drawn towards a certain direction. Things like that. Perhaps the game master scratches his nose or rubs his shoulder, and that tells the betrayer exactly what he or she needs to do to keep the adventure moving forward. So definitely get this one. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know, and thank you to those that have been sending DriveThruRPG gift certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, all the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thanks, and see you later.